Um, so yeah, we're now on to Nick. So I have the massive privilege of being able to work with Nick every day, which you should all be hugely jealous of because he's pretty cool. He's a world expert in kind of like genetics or something. That's kind of half true. He does know something about genetics. Okay, it's not even half true. He knows a little bit about genetics, but he knows a lot more about well, development, especially Java development. And he knows an awful lot about Firebase, which is why he's talking, which is a good qualification for it.
Let's not try that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So let's give him a round of applause and have a listen.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Speaking of fancy kit, I think the clicker stopped working as well, so I have to return that to the to shop. Right, okay, so, well, welcome to this talk on Firebase. Apparently, you should be expecting a raw telling of highs and lows of working with an emerging back-end solution. Now, I didn't write that. You can probably guess who did, but I'm not entirely sure what it means, but hopefully you'll find something of interest in the next 20 minutes or so. It's not going to be as shiny as the previous presentation, I'm afraid. So by way of introduction, my name's Nick. I've been a professional developer for over 23 years. I say professional because before I got paid for it, I used to develop for fun. First on a ZX Spectrum, for those of you who can remember those. I've had the privilege of working for large companies in the financial sector, using enterprise tools like Oracle and through to small companies in charity sectors, including tools like SQL, PHP, Drupal, and things. I see from my bio that I'm an Android enthusiast who is passionate about continuously learning and developing best practice. Again, thank you, Josh. But while those things are true, I think what keeps me most interested in technology is seeing how it can be actually used to help people, helping people get things done, making their lives simpler and easier. I think that's what drives my interest. I'm currently a senior developer working at Britec here in Brighton, have been for the last 3 years, which is a great privilege. So Britec doesn't need much of an introduction, partly because it co-organises and sponsors this meetup. About 10 of us, there's a nice mix of designers, developers, and business folk. We love working together, and this photo was taken from a recent team outing that we had to see the Rampion wind farm, just off the coast here, which is a good laugh. Here's a more official photo from our office. And a kind of more official description of ourselves. We focus primarily on mobile apps development, but we believe that technology is only part of the answer. We place equal focus on design as well as our processes and relationships with our clients, very important. I guess as probably most of you know, technology is in a state of constant evolution, and so we like to always remain curious. But anyway, that's enough about us. Why am I talking to you? Well, it was over a team breakfast at Cafe Plenty, which I can recommend if you haven't been there. Josh mentioned that it would be nice to have a developer talk from someone at Britec. In a moment of weakness, I can remember saying something along the lines of, sure, I'm happy to talk on something. Have you got any ideas about what? And so the die was cast. So to help me to pitch this talk, it'd be useful to see what kind of experience we've got in the room with Firebase. So could I have a quick show of hands, please, for those who have heard of Firebase? Okay, that's most of you. And if you've used it before? Okay, I've got a good mix there. Okay, so what is Firebase? On the Google website, it says that it helps you to make better mobile apps. It was acquired by Google in 2014, and it was similar to Facebook's now retired PaaS platform, if that means anything to you, in that it offered a hosted database service, user authentication features, and some other useful tools. Now, most modern applications require this stuff, and the concept behind both PaaS and Firebase is to abstract away all the technical difficulties, well, most of them, freeing you, the developer, to focus on developing a great app and focus on the bits which make your app special to your clients. I guess it's an alternative to reinventing your own solutions. I like to think of it as a Swiss Army knife of developer tools that you can pick and choose from when appropriate. So I guess it's an SDK of products that help you build apps fast without having to manage a load of architecture or infrastructure. Apologies to those of you who like managing infrastructure. I won't ask you to show your hands. Right, so Google acquired acquired Firebase. And it was rebranded and launched at Google I/O 2016 as a comprehensive set of developer tools and cloud services. And on that screen grab was just a few of the products on the web console. Now, don't worry for this talk, I'm only going to touch on a few of them rather than go through the whole lot. I've picked out a few which we've had some experience with, and hopefully some will be useful to you if you're building apps or websites. So the first one I wanted to touch on was something called crash reporting. Now, nobody wants their app to crash, but if it does, you probably want to know about when and why it happened so you can get it fixed as soon as possible. Now, you've probably heard of the thought experiment. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? That kind of thing. This is my take on it with respect to crash reporting. If an app crashes in the wild and no one reports it, did it actually happen? No matter how good you think you are at developing code or the processes that you put in place, unless you have proof to the contrary, you can't know for certain that your app is performing okay. And if you're at all serious about producing robust and stable apps, you probably want to know how well or not your app is doing. And that includes using a tool that reports crashes. Now, we'd normally use Crashalytics for our crash reporting, but I remember on one project choosing Firebase crash reporting instead because we thought we were already using Firebase for something else, and we thought we'd better try and use just one tool. And back in January this year, midway through the project, Google acquired Crashalytics and Fabric from Twitter. And if you look at the Firebase docs, it says, you probably can't see it, but it says Crashalytics will soon become the primary crash reporter for Firebase. We recommend using Crashalytics. So we obviously made the wrong choice, and I guess that's one of the disadvantages of being an early adopter or using an emerging back-end solution. But it got worse. If you go to the Fabric homepage, you see this message. In due time, we bridge the gap and give you one place to develop and grow your app. So frustrating, it looks like things haven't quite settled yet. And maybe it'll morph back into Firebase Crashalytics again, who knows. So basically, caveat emptor, buyer beware. I guess the flip side of this is quite exciting because presumably it means they're working on this tooling. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they produce. And actually, as of yesterday, they formally announced that the beta launch of Firebase Crashalytics. So even my slides are getting out of date just over a week. So yeah, it's exciting times. Anyway, whatever it's called, it's a useful tool to have at your disposal. And once you've set up your Firebase project on the web console, it can be installed on your Android or iOS project by adding one-line dependency in your Gradle or your pod file. And that's it. Crash reporting will automatically generate reports for fatal errors or uncaught exceptions, and you'll be able to report on them in your web console. So, for example, there's a demo app called Flood It, and you can see in the bottom right there, it's had 27,000 crashes on iOS in the last 30 days, which I guess is something the creators probably would want to know about, unless it was intentional of their demo. One of the useful features of crash reporting is that it helpfully, you can't see that at all, can you? Is that it helpfully groups together, instances, so you can see how many instances there were for a particular issue. It also shows how many users were impacted by the crash, which is great stats to have when you're triaging or planning what to work on next. But crash reporting isn't just for app crashes. If you've ever written code like this, and I must admit I just took it off the internet, but you get the point, this bit should not be reached. You can also use crash reporting to log situations like that. If they do happen, you probably want to know about them. So again, you can use crash reporting like that to throw an unexpected exception that you didn't really think would happen. These will appear as non-fatal exceptions in the console, and you can also get an email about it if you want to. If it only happens once, I guess you probably just ignore it. But if you find you've got 50 of them before breakfast, it's probably indication that there's an issue there that you haven't planned for and it's worth looking into. Okay, another useful tool in Firebase is the analytics. And I guess none of you need convincing on the benefit of having analytics. And Google Analytics is pretty much the de facto standard in the web world. Like its web counterpart, the Firebase one helps you understand how your users are using or not using your again, like the crash reporting, there's 0 lines of code to write to start using it. A simple one-liner in the Gradle or build a pod file. Analytics also plays nicely with the other Firebase tools. So for example, Analytics logs the events for each crash, so you can get a better understanding or better sense of what was happening in the lead up to a crash. You can also create audiences from a group of users who have experienced multiple crashes, for example, which lets you target them then with specific messaging, maybe an apology, depending on how severe the crash was or something. For us, a bit like the crash reporting, our experience hasn't been totally pain-free, if I'm honest. Firebase Analytics is so 2016, and I guess that's the trouble with cutting-edge tools. Sometimes you can end up cutting yourself. It underwent some housekeeping, and partway through the project was renamed Google Analytics for Firebase, which on its own doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're up against project deadlines, the last thing you want is for the churn or the uncertainty caused by having your dev tools shifting beneath you. And for us, the name change was particularly unsettling because on one project in particular, we just refactored the existing code base from using the standalone Google Analytics into using Firebase Analytics. And then when they changed the name again back into Google Analytics for Firebase, you're kind of left wondering, what exactly should I be using? The other issue we had was, as you can see, we tried to, when we refactored, we tried to keep the same category, action, label, name, strings that we'd use in Google Analytics. And the problem we found with that was that our custom events weren't being reported properly in the web console. And at the time, the only option was to use something called BigQuery, which is a paid-for Google tool. I kind of think the big means expensive, because it is quite expensive. But you can use it to drill into the snapshots of the data. The recommendation is, well, it still is to use predefined constants instead, which I've shown you a few there. Our situation has improved somewhat since then, but I think you're still better off sticking to the documented parameter names and things, because then you'll probably be assured that Google are going to report them to you in a way that you can see them. Like the web version of Google Analytics, you can also get real-time data too. So there's a debug view that you can use while actually building the app. And there's also a stream view, which I'm going to attempt to demo in a minute. For our project, we're in the unusual position of having a client who was keen to use the latest tools and technologies. In particular, they wanted us to use Firebase. And so we attempted to use the stream view as soon as the doc started mentioning it. And again, we found ourselves on the cutting edge where we were trying to use a feature before it left beta. And I remember having a Hangout video chat with a Firebase engineer who was showing us how to use it. But as it wasn't yet public, we couldn't see the results of what we were doing. And so his role was one of more reassuring us that we weren't doing anything wrong, and assuring us that it would be released imminently. So that was kind of fun. So if I flip over to here. Okay, so this is the web view console for Firebase, and you can see the Android analytics here saying you've got 17,000 monthly users. If I flick to the stream view, okay, you kind of get a cross between Google Maps, I guess, and Analytics, where it shows you where your users are in kind of real time. I'm kind of mixed as to the use of this. I mean, it's quite fun to see that you've got 8 active users in Atlanta. I guess if you were a bit more bothered about the location of your users and things, it might be quite useful. I'm going to try and experiment. I've kind of prepped some of my colleagues to use this particular app, and I was hoping that Brighton would come up on the list, which it does seem to have done, which is quite cool. So what you can do is you can grab a snapshot of the data of the users who are using your app in real time. And it's a Nexus 5X, which might be Josh. We don't know, it's anonymous. Yeah, Google won't tell you who your users actually are, because I guess that would breach all sorts of things. But so if we scroll down here, you should see that at 8:32, yeah, some extra steps, whatever that is. So these are the analytics events that have been captured. Let's see. Okay, so you can see it's an automatic event, and I don't know what that means. Okay, screen class. So you're looking at the game board, for example. So it's quite, I mean, it's quite fun if you're building an app and you care about these sorts of things. I guess it'd be quite useful. I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
But there are things like Mixpanel where you can set like a username, and so for example, if I'm trying to track down where my app's not working for a particular user,
Yeah.
this is not really applicable because there always could be.
I think Google say you're not supposed to record. Sure. Okay, it's quite a long question. The question was, are you sure it's not anonymous? Is that kind of like a summary? Yeah. Is it with? I suspect we probably. Okay, I guess some of these events here are custom events. I guess there's nothing stopping you putting in user identifiable information like a user ID or something. Yeah, so you can put in, you can create your own properties. And I guess there's nothing technically to stop you putting in user ID. I think in the docs, Google asks you not to do that because I guess they don't want you to be able to identify users. Yeah. All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess with Crashlytics that they've got now, you probably still can do that. Yeah. I suspect it's probably more to do with the real-time nature of this. You can start stalking your users or something, or you probably don't want people knowing exactly where you are when you're using the app. I don't know. Like I said, there's probably nothing to stop you doing it, but I think I did see something trying to steer you away from doing that. Okay, let's. Okay, so that's analytics. Okay, so another common feature that or requirement you need when building apps or websites is authentication, the process of identifying the users of your app. Firebase authentication provides a number of tools which makes it relatively easy to implement authentication. So there's like simple username and password authentication can be managed directly in the web console. But you can also integrate with a number of other providers. And if you could see it, there'd be the usual suspects there like Google, Facebook, GitHub, Twitter, or you can roll your own authentication system if you wanted to. And one of our clients wanted an app that used Google authentication, but the requirement was also to integrate with one of their custom CMSs. And so using Firebase authentication, we could enable the Google sign-in method. And when the user authenticated successfully, we got an ID token back, which we could then pass on to their custom CMS. And they could then verify that token independently, directly with Facebook, and retrieve the user's user ID from that token. And so their CMS system was able to verify that the user was who they said, or who we said they were. So it's quite, yeah, it's quite neat. And you didn't, I guess it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Another benefit of integrating with something like Google Authentication is that you can streamline the whole authentication process. So for example, if a user's already signed into Google on another app on your device, then using the SDK, you can automatically retrieve their credentials and bypass the login screen altogether. And although I haven't used it myself, I probably should mention something called Firebase UI, which comes under the Google Open Source Initiative. Basically, it's a library offering simple, customizable UI bindings and things which is on top of the core Firebase SDK. They say that it aims to eliminate boilerplate code and promote best practices for authentication and other things. And that animated GIF just comes from their GitHub repo, but it is one of their demo apps, and they seem to have some nice examples there. So I guess it's probably something to add to my list of things to investigate. Okay, moving on to something called remote config. It's a bit of an odd one to describe, but it's quite easy to overhype it, which I think does happen a bit on the website. It's billed as something which lets you change the behavior and appearance of your app without publishing any app updates. And it's sold in a way that's bound to get your marketing departments, if you've got them excited, as they think they can change huge swathes of your application without going through a whole release cycle. The reality is isn't quite as exciting as that. The reality is that you set up name value pairs of data in the web console, which are then pushed down to your app. It's a bit like having a hash map or a dictionary of data, which your app can then download. Now, while you can use remote config to change your app's behavior and appearance at runtime, it doesn't happen by magic. The key thing is that you have to plan for it in advance when you build and publish your app. And the general idea is that you create in-app defaults to start with that control some app behavior or appearance. And then after you've released, you can then later on in the web console override some of the values, and which will, I guess, give the appearance of changing your app's behavior. We've used it for a couple of clients, but one in particular, we built an app with a navigation drawer with menu items that linked to different web URLs. And the customer wanted to be able to change these at runtime without having a release. So we defined, as you can see there, a list of menu items as little JSON snippets where you can define a title and a URL and an icon to use. And then they can override it when they want to, changing the order, etc. There are a couple of nice, interesting use cases, I guess, with remote config. You can customize your app for particular segments of your user base. So not everyone has to get the same values, so you can provide variation by app version or language, or maybe target a particular audience from analytics. I guess going back to our crash example from earlier, maybe you could give people who've experienced a crash a discount on something, on a purchase, by way of saying sorry, or you can use a random percentile targeting, which they give you, so you can perform A/B testing, for example, on a small section of a user base. If you want to know more about remote config, there's a really great video from Todd Kerpelman, who's a developer advocate on the Firebase blog. He's got loads of different strategies for loading remote config, and it's worth a look if you're interested in that. Okay, not many more. Okay, it's notifications. That's a way of sending messages from the web console to your app, and if you've used PARS, it's like the notification system that they had. It makes use of Google's, or some of Google's infrastructure called Firebase Cloud Messaging, which they say is a cross-platform messaging solution that lets you reliably deliver messages at no cost, and it is free. When you're sending messages, they can either be done manually, like I said, from the web console, or also, if you've got servers, you can automate it using the Node.js SDK or an HTTP API. The messages broadly fall into two categories. You've got the notification messages, which are quite simple. We can think of them as quite simple ones, which just display messages. And then you've got data messages, which carry some sort of data payload that makes sense to your particular app. And in that scenario, it's up for you to define what happens when a message is received. So, for example, it could be a message telling your app to sync with the server. So if you built a news app or something, there could be some new articles to display, and you could ping a data message prompting the app to get in touch. One of our clients, we had a Google App Engine server that periodically pushed new content to display to the app, and in that scenario we were using data messages to send a payload across to the app, and we had to implement the display logic ourselves, which was like a local notification on the device. Okay, so I'm going to finish in a minute, but briefly wanted to mention the Firebase database, mainly because this is the product that was originally called Firebase when Google bought it. It's a real-time database, and it's built as a tool that lets you store and sync your data with their NoSQL cloud database. The data is synced across all clients in real time, and it remains available when your app goes offline. I guess before I go any further on that, I should note that Google have recently announced a new product called Google Firestore, which is currently in beta. And it improves on the successes of the real-time database with a new, more intuitive data model. It also features a richer, faster query and scales better than the real-time database. Now, I've not got any direct experience myself with either databases, but hearing some of the problems that my colleagues had with the speed of the real-time database makes me think that we weren't alone in that, and maybe the new Firestore product was designed to address some of those issues. And in fact, as I was finishing off this talk, I read a piece on the Firebase blog which about the scalability of Cloud Firestore, and it said, I quote, "As one engineer here likes to put it, it's basically impossible to create a slow query in Cloud Firestore." So I look forward to having the opportunity to try and prove him wrong. That sounds like a golden opportunity. Although, I guess to be fair to Google, it is kind of a credible claim coming from a company who recently bought us Cloud Spanner. I don't know if you've heard of that one. It's the they call it the world's first managed, horizontally scalable, globally consistent relational database. It's been used internally by Google for a number of years. And they claim that Spanner supports tens of millions of queries per second. And it runs some of their most critical services like AdWords and Google Play. But that's probably a subject for another talk. But yeah, that was quite exciting. Okay, so as I bring this talk into land, first a couple of disclaimers. I've only had time to touch on a few of the products under the Firebase umbrella. There are lots more, including some interesting new ones there like predictions or cloud functions or performance monitoring. Most of them are currently in beta. And secondly, in case you're wondering, I'm not affiliated to Google in any way or getting any commission from them for this talk. Although if there's anyone from Google listening, my details will be at the end. Okay, so what's my verdict? Is Firebase good for anything? For all its detractors, I think Firebase is quite an impressive set of tools and clever marketing. The obvious goal is to capture or grow developer mindshare, getting developers like you guys on board and using your products or talking about them. It's a recipe for longevity and revenue. The fact that it's initially free, I think, is probably all the more impressive. It's not a small undertaking creating a globally responsive SDK. I think for Google, though, the stakes are high. They've got to keep on innovating and stay relevant, or they're just going to wither, I guess, into obscurity. I guess that's a challenge for a lot of providers. The Firebase brand is now a year or so old, so some of its products are mature and battle-tested. Just be aware that not all the individual products are necessarily so mature. Beta does mean beta. Also, things might get renamed, or there might be some duplicates products for a while. So just as you would choose any third-party tool, you need to do the same due diligence to make sure it's the right thing for you. Should you be using it? Well, I think you should. If you haven't started using it, there's no excuse. It's free, and in some cases, it doesn't require any coding to start benefiting from it. If you're in the business of producing apps or websites, I think you should at least be experimenting with it. If you aren't, I guess you're probably either using a solution from another provider, and there are other people providing similar tools. Just, I guess, make sure you compare what's on offer and get what's best for you. Or it could mean that you're creating your own solutions. And I guess this slide was just to remember not to reinvent the wheel unless you're in the wheel business. And just a few final thoughts. Remember that, like I said before, with any cutting-edge tool, like a sharp knife, you can cut yourself. So remember that things can also go wrong. And I didn't really mention it much, but Firebase also works across iOS and web platforms too, and I believe Unity for some of those products. Okay, that's it. My contact details are there if you want to get in touch, and thanks for listening.